Last week in our special full-hour expose of David Suzuki, we told you about a bizarre publicity stunt that an anti-oil lobby group had managed to schedule at the Royal Ontario Museum. Remember this? When Suzuki saw me approaching him, he jumped in his car, and when I tried asking him questions, he answered for a second through the door and then slammed the door again. Remember this? Take a look.
Pardon me?
I thought you had an event here right now. Are you running away from me?
I didn't. No. I'm preparing my notes for the event.
Do you have a minute to talk? You were talking with them. How come you don't want to talk with me? Is it because I ask skeptical questions?
You distort and you don't tell the truth.
Well, tell me the truth. What's the truth? Do you have a...
You heard me. I don't want to talk to Sun News because you don't tell the truth.
What's the truth? That makes me laugh every time I see it. It's so weird and passive-aggressive and juvenile. It's like a child hiding under the covers or something and popping his head out, "You can't see me," or, I don't know, just putting their hands over their eyes and saying, "You can't see me because I can't see you." What a kook. Anyways, back to the museum. That's what the whole encounter with Suzuki on the street there was about. It was about a stunt that he's pulling with the museum. Now, anyone can rent a room in a museum. Some people have parties or fancy receptions there, maybe even a wedding reception, but this was different. The museum itself actually agreed to participate in this thing as an official museum event. It's called The Trial of David Suzuki, and it's a theatrical stunt designed with the explicit purpose of attacking Canada's oil sands. That's part of the contract. It's bought and paid for by an anti-oil sands lobby group called the Cape Farewell Foundation. It has an operation in Canada, but naturally its head office is in a foreign country, meddling in our Canadian affairs. And they just plain old paid the Royal Ontario Museum to host this attack.
Trial of David Suzuki, which is a theatrical event that's going to be happening on November 6th at the ROM in the Corelli Court. And this is part of an exhibition called Carbon 14 that's put on by Cape Farewell.
Oh, but of course it is. I mean, I guess the museum's hard up for cash. I mean, the idea that you can just rent their reputation, not just their room, is shocking to me, but I guess times are tough. But I wonder if they'd be willing to rent themselves out to lobbyists on the other side of the argument, too, like maybe ExxonMobil. Would the Royal Ontario Museum sell themselves for $100 grand to host a PR stunt for Exxon also? Anyways, here's why it's a stunt. Because it pretends that David Suzuki is at risk of being prosecuted in Canada for criminal sedition because of his wacky anti-oil sands views. That's a laugh, of course. The government of Canada actually has given Suzuki a 40-year luxury contract to spout his nonsense on TV, and the Royal Ontario Museum is funded by taxpayers' money too. That's not exactly the sign of a man on the run from the government. In fact, as we've shown you before, Suzuki is the one who wants to throw his enemies in jail. Remember this?
Now, if you have people who stand up to take positions of leadership and they deliberately suppress or ignore information vital to making an informed decision, I think that's willful blindness. And willful blindness, I understand, is a legal entity that you can sue people for.
But are you seriously suggesting that politicians should be tried and possibly even jailed for exercising free speech?
Well, I throw it out as something that ought to be brought up. I haven't really thought it through to the end.
Yeah, but he's been saying it for years. So let's recap. You've got a guy who wants to throw other people in jail, pretending that he's at risk of being prosecuted and jailed. Got it. You've got a foreign anti-oil foundation paying off a Canadian museum to host this propaganda morality tale. And you've got a very evasive, very childish David Suzuki who doesn't like to answer real questions about his real sins, not crimes against the law, but his hypocrisy and double standards and his own anti-freedom ideas. Here was my attempt to ask him about that last week. Aren't you the one who's actually asked people for politicians to be put in jail? No one's ever asked for you to be put in jail. You've asked for politicians to be put in jail. Do you still think that people who disagree with you should be put in jail?
Not people who disagree with me, people who fail to act properly in the interest of future generations.
But you don't act properly. You have 3 homes. You jet around the world. You were in Australia. You jetted here. Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
Why should I talk to you when you know what your story is and what you're going to get out of it?
Well, but you
simply don't do exaggerate.
Sorry, please don't touch me. Please don't touch
Excuse me. All right, can I get in?
But how come? Have you talked to Harriet Sachs? Have you talked to Harriet Sachs, the sitting judge on this?
No, I haven't. Very brave man.
I'd like to make a correction. He doesn't have 3 homes. I was wrong. He has 4 homes. Okay, now you've seen that video already, but remember how we ended the show that day? I mentioned at the end of the clip there. We've come to expect biased anti-oil sands propaganda from the CBC, where Suzuki works and where that organizer of this stunt, Lloyd Brown, works. We've come to expect it from the Royal Ontario Museum. I hate to say that, but it's true. But what bothered me the most about this whole stunt is that in the show trial of Suzuki, the judge presiding over the whole thing was going to actually be a real sitting judge on the Superior Court of Ontario, as in someone whose job absolutely depends on her being neutral and even-handed and fair and objective. You know the rule for judges, no politics at all. Well, Justice Harriet Sachs of the Ontario Superior Court had agreed to participate in this stunt, to lend it credibility. It doesn't matter which way she would rule on Suzuki. The whole thing was an anti-oil stunt. It didn't matter. It was all about shaming Stephen Harper and the oil sands, all about branding Suzuki as a martyr, as if he would be really on trial. We know the show trial, mock trial, was a biased work of propaganda. So what about them? But what worried me was that the real court's independence would be lost, or at least would appear to be lost. And when Justice Sachs goes back to her real judge job, well, real people in real lawsuits in the real court might not be able to be 100% confident of her independence. That worried me. Now, I was very careful about this observation. I wrote the judge a detailed letter asking for her side of the story, asking about the appearance of bias, asking if she had done other political activities for environmentalists too that I didn't know about, asking about the wisdom of her doing stunts like this, especially when her husband in real life is environmental lawyer Clayton Ruby, who is at this very moment suing the federal government over environmental rules. I mean, shouldn't she be even more careful than normal because of that instead of more political than normal? Well, the judge refused to answer me. Her clerk told me on the phone that the judge did not want to talk to me, and she didn't send any message or reply. Now, that's fine. That's her right. She's a judge. I'm just a nobody who hassles her husband's pet environmental causes. And as you recall, our show aired on Thursday night last week. Well, on Friday afternoon, on the eve of the Thanksgiving long weekend, guess what? Without contacting me, without a press release or a statement on the court's website, Madam Justice Harriet Sachs, wife of environmental activist Clayton Ruby, mother of anti-sun activist Emma Ruby Sachs, mock judge at the PR stunt trial of David Suzuki, well, she actually did the right thing. A couple of days late, maybe, but she did the right thing. She put the integrity of her office ahead of her husband's political agenda. She backed out. As a direct result of the scrutiny that the Sun News Network put on this sham PR stunt, Madam Justice Harriet Sachs quit. Here, I just showed you there, a press release the museum put out, though they didn't send it to me this time, funny that. The Royal Ontario Museum and the Cape Farewell announced, I'm quoting from the release, announced that the Honourable Madam Justice Harriet Sachs has relinquished her role as judge in the trial of David Suzuki, scheduled for November 6 in the ROM's Gallery. The production is presented in conjunction with Carbon 14, Climate is Culture exhibition. At this time, the role of the judge has not been filled, unquote. I mean, right there, they just keep pushing that anti-carbon thing, even as they're announcing the judge is out. How could a judge have possibly agreed to participate in that? Now, this is a huge win for the Sun News Network. It is a win for taxpayers. It is a win for Canada against a foreign lobby group that thinks it can buy off anyone. CBC staff like Suzuki and that CBC producer, our museums, and maybe even a judge. I'm glad the judge quit. But where's the dignity and self-respect of our CBC and museum now? I'm glad Justice Sachs did the right thing, even if it took her a couple of days. But she still hasn't answered how this whole stunt came about in the first place. Who suggested it to her? Was it her husband, Clayton Ruby? Had she participated in other environmental political activities that we don't know about? Did she run this by the Chief Justice or the Judicial Council first? I put these questions to her in writing last week. I still haven't received an answer. I don't know if I ever will. I frankly don't think I ever will. But I think in the interest of clearing the air, we all should get an answer, don't you think? Because it's important that the courts not only truly be unbiased, but that they appear to be unbiased too. But what about our tax-funded museums and our tax-funded CBC? Is it okay for them to be bought and paid for by lobbyists for a foreign anti-oil front group? Until they give Suzuki and his foreign funders the boot, this problem remains unresolved.